Thank you for tuning in to CITR 101.9 FM. You're listening to Democracy Watch, the News Collective's weekly local current affairs program. It's Thursday, November 23rd, and it's 5:04 p.m. We're broadcasting from UBC's Vancouver campus on the ancestral, traditional, and unceded territories of the Hunkaminam-speaking Musqueam people. We have a big show for you today. After headlines, we'll hear a story on the wave of sexual assault allegations that rocked Vancouver's music scene recently and led to the death of a local DJ. After that, we have an exclusive Democracy Watch report on the media's coverage of the October 14th bombings in Mogadishu, Somalia, as well as how the Vancouver's Somali community is responding. This is Democracy Watch. I'm Ryan Patrick Jones.
And I am Rahmatullah Sheikh. Now for this week's headlines. Mudslide near Hope closes Trans-Canada Highway. A mudslide that came crashing across the Trans-Canada Highway just after midnight today has caused the highway to close east of Chilliwack. 5 sections of the highway were covered by mudslides after days of rain caused the mud, muck and rocks to come loose from a nearby mountain. Several vehicles were caught in the slide, including 2 tractor trailers and a car. No one was hurt during the incidents. The highway remains closed, going both ways as the road is cleared. Geotechnical engineers from the province have been sent in to conduct an assessment.
Indigenous artists paint a mural on the tiny home to protest Kinder Morgan pipeline. 2 respected Indigenous artists, Isaac Murdoch and Christy Belcourt, were in Vancouver this week to lend their artistic abilities to the campaign against the Kinder Morgan pipeline. Murdoch and Belcourt painted a mural on a tiny house that will be placed in the way of the proposed route of the pipeline. The painted house will be placed in the territory of the Secwepemc people, whose land is located outside of Kamloops. It is the third of its kind and will provide homes for people in the Secwepemc community while posing a physical barrier to the pipeline. The mural was painted during a 2-day public event at the Redgate Art Society on East Hastings Street in the downtown east side of Vancouver. Isaac Murdoch is from Serpent River First Nation in Ontario. He is best known for designing the Thunderbird woman image that became iconic during the Standing Rock protests against the Dakota Access Pipeline. Christy Belcourt is a Métis artist from Ontario and has received numerous national and regional awards for her art.
The Vancouver Police has asked for $285 million from the 2018 budget. The Vancouver Police Board will vote on a $285 million budget for police services for next year. The amount requires a 4.2% increase over last year and would make a full 1/5 of the budget for the entire city of Vancouver for 2018. Now, the vote comes on the heels of public criticism from the Derbert Travis, the executive director of Integrity BC. Travis wrote an op-ed in the Georgia Straight saying that the BC police services are not doing enough to take on the fentanyl crisis. Travis contrasted the intense action taken by other police services in Canada with the relatively small number of fentanyl-related arrests made in BC. Now, the problem, Travis wrote, has to do with the makeup of the police board that will be voting on today's budget. 7 board members are provincial appointed, and Travis blames the previous Liberal government for selecting members based on their financial contributions to the Liberal Party of BC rather than their relative experience.
The federal government announces $40 billion for national housing strategy. The federal government announced on Wednesday that it will be committing $40 billion to a 10-year housing plan with the goal of reducing homelessness in Canada by 50%. Canada's housing minister Jean-Yves Duclos announced the changes at a press conference in the downtown east side. Details of the plan include building 100,000 new affordable housing units and repairing and protecting affordable households. Most of the funding was already included in the 2017 federal budget, with the exception of $4 billion for the Canada Housing Benefit. This new tax credit will allow families to reduce their tax burden by up to $2,500 annually, beginning in April 2020. It is unclear how much of the federal money will go to Vancouver. Selina Robinson, the Provincial Minister of Housing and Municipal Affairs, was also at the press conference. The current provincial housing plan includes $400 million for the next 4 years. The plan will create 1,700 units of affordable rental housing in BC and housing for low-income and at-risk tenants. In related news, A rally will be held on Saturday, November 25th in downtown Vancouver. Activists and tenants' rights groups are aiming to put pressure on governments to do more to solve the city's housing crisis. The National Housing Day of Action is being organized by the Vancouver Tenants Union, the Chinatown Action Group, and Carnegie Community Action Project. Starting at noon, rally goers will march from 58 West Hastings Street to 105 Kiefer Street, the site of the recently rejected Beatty Group development project. The rally is in support of a number of demands, including more money for social housing, renewing subsidies for low-income tenants, turning 105 Kiefer Street into a community housing project, and eradicating homelessness, with priority given to marginalized groups such as Indigenous people, recent immigrants, racialized communities, women fleeing violence, youth, and disabled people.
Some more news coming in from East Vancouver, where residents will have rallied to save local pool in Templeton. A group of local residents have mobilized to stop the closure of the Templeton Park pool in East Vancouver. The Vancouver Park Board has recommended closing the pool as part of its Van Splash plan to revitalize the city's pools and aquatics center. Jason McGarry, member of the Hastings Community Center, started a petition last year which was aimed at keeping the pool open. The petition now has 1,200 signatures. McGarry says that the pool is incredibly important for seniors and children in the area. In an interview with the Vancouver Courier, McGarry said that even though there is a pool at the Britannia Community Center and recreation facilities at Hastings Community Center, closing the Templeton pool would leave a significant portion of the community without a neighborhood pool. He added that closing the Templeton pool would force those who want to swim to walk 30 minutes or take a series of buses to access alternative pools.
And those were this week's headlines from Vancouver and the Lower Mainland. You're listening to Democracy Watch on CITR 101.9 FM. We're going to take a short break and then hear a Democracy Watch exclusive on the aftermath of the sexual assault allegations that have shaken Vancouver's local music scene. Stay tuned.
Chloride.
Actually, dude, it's salt.
That's what I said. Sodium chloride.
Discorder, that salty mag from CITR, is back with a stunning November issue.
This month has an op-ed on the revitalization of Hogan's Alley, features Gamelan Bike Bike, shines a spotlight on youth for Chinese seniors, and reviews Mitch Cotta's new album and the debut of Unseated, a new column dedicated to highlighting Indigenous voices and experiences.
And an extra special thank you to our advertisers, Camber Concerts, The Rickshaw, the Rio Theater, the Cinematheque, and Mint Records.
The issue is jam-packed with reviews and news, so pick up your copy of Discorder from one of our over 100 distribution locations all around Vancouver, or read online at discorder.ca.
Dude, that would be salt.
Ago, the Penderguide program helped Chinese Canadians and Asian Canadians discover and create community radio. Join CITR and Discorder in celebrating the very first English language radio program created in Canada about Chinese Canadian community on Friday, November 24th from 7 to 9 p.m. at Access Gallery in Chinatown. Check out the Facebook event or go to citr.ca for more information.
Ever wonder what the 60s thought the future would sound like? Retro-futurist dream pop band Young Blood returned to play the Biltmore Cabaret on Saturday, November 25th with glam rock outfit Art Deco and LA-based Maya Manser. Tickets are on sale now.
JP's a production.
You might want to clear your calendar for the 25th of November.
Why's that?
Because the UBC Africa Awareness Initiative are hosting the most anticipated dance party of the year, Dioko.
Dioko, what's that?
Dioko is going to be a night full of Afrobeat, dancehall, soca, Kwaito, and hip-hop. It's going to be from 9 p.m. to 1 a.m. at Kerner's Pub at UBC.
But where can I get my tickets?
Check out our website, ubcaai.org, or Facebook, UBC African Awareness Initiative for ticket information.
And we're back. This is Ryan Patrick Jones on Democracy Watch on CITR 101.9 FM. You've just heard local news headlines from around the Lower Mainland. We're now joined by journalist Melanie Woods. Melanie is a graduate student at UBC's School of Journalism and CITR's Gender Empowerment Collective coordinator. She's the host of 2 radio shows on our very own CITR, Intersections and Into the Woods. She's a real sharp reporter and is going to read her recently published article on the turmoil in Vancouver's music scene, following October's wave of sexual assault allegations. This story was originally published on thethunderbird.ca.
Fantastic. Thanks, Ryan. So, after a wave of sexual assault allegations posted on social media and the death of a local DJ last month, members of Vancouver's music scene are calling for community standards for venues and more resources to respond to callouts. The Redgate Arts Society will host a public town hall in mid-December to determine what actions must be taken by Vancouver's venue operators, promoters, and artists. Anna Rose Carrico is one of Redgate's directors and the executive director of the Redgate Review stage. She said one possible solution could be to establish an autonomous organization responsible for dealing with accusations and holding venues accountable for promoting safe spaces. She says, "My fantasy outcome is basically that we develop a community standard, not just for Redgate but other venues, of what we will tolerate as well as some sort of accountability process." Carrico said the onus is on venues to ensure everyone who participates in the music scene is safe. The last few months have made it abundantly clear that it's not just our venue, it's the rest of the community, she said. We all need to be working on this. On October 14th, a list of 7 names of well-known Vancouver DJs and promoters alleged to have committed sexual assault was posted on Facebook. One of them, Zachary Webb, was found dead by suicide 3 days later, though it is still unclear if he knew of the post when he died. Vancouver artist and editor of Discorder magazine, Britt Bachman, agrees that Vancouver's club community needs a way to take action after callouts. She said some people think that when men are called out on social media, they will simply, quote, disappear. But that's just not the case. That's not realistic, she said. Bachman says approaches to addressing sexual violence need to consider perpetrators as well as victims. She said that after it happens, there's survivor and community healing that needs to happen, but you also have healing that needs to be in place in terms of perpetrators of sexual violence, which is a really hard perspective to wrap your head around, Bachman said. She says there's already some good work being done at the street level to promote safe venues, but more is needed. According to Bachman, the people now putting time and effort into dealing with these issues have been on board for a long time. Moving forward, I think it would be good for some other organizations to pop up around this topic in regards to what happens after the call-out, she said. Vancouver currently already has at least one group educating venues and operators about sexual assault in the city's music scene. Good Night Out Vancouver provides harm reduction workshops to venues and operates the Nightlife Street Team, a group of volunteers who patrol the Granville Strip on weekends to support vulnerable partygoers. Good Night Out Vancouver coordinator Stacey Forrester said demand for her organization's services from more mainstream venues has grown following the Facebook callouts and Webb's death. We did a fully public workshop on November 2nd at the Vogue Theatre, which was totally different for us, Forrester said, and that was initiated by the folks at Fortune Sound Club. Forrester said over 75 people attended, and workshop requests have increased by 300% since last month. She hopes community members who don't always focus on social justice will now take the issue more seriously. She said that when you're part of a scene, you're kind of in a bubble and able to pretend that sexual harassment and sexual assault doesn't happen in your scene, which is a very dangerous and slippery slope to sit on, she said. The fact that the mainstream Granville Strip is reaching out, that means it's peak, quote, a day of reckoning. Good Night Out will also partner with Vancouver Art and Leisure and local performance artist Dorothy Joyce to host a symposium and, quote, feminist dance party on November 25th called Intersect. The event will feature a panel discussion, music, art installations, and local DJs. Bachman said the only way that sexual assault and rape culture is going to be addressed in Vancouver is with a community effort. But Bachman says creating safe spaces is not enough. Fallout from online callouts also needs to be addressed. Organizations like Good Night Out deal with harm reduction, and they've taken a really strong leadership role in talking about the issue of gender-based violence, she said. But I think it's also good to recognize the difference between harm reduction, encouraging safer spaces where this kind of thing doesn't happen, and dealing with it after it happens. Ultimately, Carrico agrees in order to progress, the community desperately needs new resources. She says, it's never been this overt. We've never had a list of names before. In the past, basically the only tools we've used as a community has been calling out and ostracism. But it's become clear that those are not good enough tools for the community to move forward.
All right. Thank you very much for reading that, Mel. I really appreciate it. It's a very timely and important topic and a great reporting. Now that we have you in the studio, Rematul and I would like to ask you a few questions, if that's all right.
Of course.
All right, sounds good. So first of all, how did you find out about this story? Is it something that you have a personal connection to, or did you just read about it through the media?
So I found out about this story initially actually through my involvement here. Working in community radio means that you're kind of connected to these communities that exist within the city, and you hear these things. And so even though I wasn't necessarily like Facebook friends directly with the people who are directly involved in this, I'm friends of them and things like that. And so I actually heard rumblings about this as it was happening that week of October 14th from people just kind of around the community. And then just a few days later, the one of our instructors, Francis Beulah, published a story in the Globe. Sarah Berman published a fantastic story in Vice talking about Webb's death and the Facebook callouts and things like that. And so I was paying attention to this back in October, and when it came time a couple weeks ago to kind of pitch our stories for this next project, I had a lot of questions left of what happens now. I think so many of these stories, especially you see with all these Weinstein stories, is, you know, they talk about the call out and they talk about, okay, so-and-so is taking a leave of absence or something, but what happens after that? How do these communities move forward? Are they actually going to do anything to make things better? So that was a question I had going forward kind of into this.
Awesome. So, like, yeah, what'll happen the next day and the day after that?
Yeah, it's like we have to continue moving on in this community. And the same way, I think it was Bachman who makes a really good point, is that, like, these people don't just go away. You can't just expect, like, to call somebody out and have them just poof, disappear. That's not how these societies work. And some of these people are reintegrated back into these communities, and some of them aren't. But we have to have resources in place in order to be able to kind of heal as a community regarding that.
All right. So can you tell us a bit more about the Redgate Art Society? What's their role in the music community?
So the Redgate Art Society is kind of a DIY venue who's really been on kind of the cutting edge of kind of consent awareness in the city. They were the first venue to do workshops with Good Night Out 2 years ago. And they operate two venues. So they operate the proper Redgate Art Society in the east side of downtown. And they also operate the Redgate Review stage on Granville Island. And that's where I went and met up with Anna Rose to do that interview. And so, yeah, they operate venues, and they kind of, the goal is to provide venues for underground artists and whatnot in the city.
Okay.
Yeah, and just wondering, what are the challenges of asking venues and arts and culture organizations to impose standards for sexual assault callouts?
It's hard because nobody really knows what those standards are when it comes to it. And everybody has a different approach to it. And, like, it's very hard for people to agree on these kinds of issues. And so for some organizations like Good Night Out, they see harm reduction as an answer. So it's the idea of, like, creating spaces where these things don't happen, educating your staff, your bouncers, your bartenders, and your venue operators to be able to, like, see signs of these things happening in their venues or in their communities and say something or to stop it before it even happens. Whereas there's some other people say, you know, we need something to be able to deal with another organization. And so both Carrico and Bachman independently brought up the idea of, like, an organization like Good Night Out, but it's not about harm reduction. It's about happening after that. And they want it to be like an autonomous body of volunteers run similar to Good Night Out, but focusing more on kind of mediating these kinds of conversations and discussions that are happening in the community and making sure that, like, everybody is being as safe about it as they can, which is a hard thing to say. It's such a hard topic to talk about because you don't want to be, like, a rape apologist or things like that, of course, but you do need to recognize the fact that, like, there's still, after you accuse somebody of something, they're still out there, and you need to kind of figure out how to mediate those conversations. So I think a lot of these people are calling for the formation of a new organization here in the city to do that. Whether or not that will actually come to terms, we'll have to see after the town hall in December. I like the idea of the town hall in December because I think that it's going to be open to the public, and the idea, Carrico's very concrete, and she's the one who's organizing it, that she wants concrete action to come out of that. She wants lists of policies. She wants the starts of these kinds of organizations, because conversation isn't going to solve these problems. You need to actually start doing things.
And so what level of involvement is there from other groups in the music scene or other venues?
There's been a high level of involvement. So, like the story is mentioning, demand for Good Night Out's workshops has increased a lot from, like, venues on the main Granville Strip. And kind of the activists that I talk to see that as a sign that people are starting to take this seriously. And it's it sucks that it took somebody dying for people to start taking something like this seriously. And there's something that Bachman said in my interview with her, where she said, you know, I've seen call-outs before and nothing's changed. And so many people, like so many women with all this Weinstein stuff going on, like when it was first happening, it didn't feel new because, like, we've heard it all the way going back. Like, you have Ghomeshi, you have Bill Cosby. It's like these aren't new things for people. Like, we've experienced harassment and all this stuff like forever. This isn't exactly a new thing. What's new is people trying to hopefully do something about it. And that's a big debate in the community right now, especially locally here right now.
Is there a precedent for a kind of organization like this within any music communities elsewhere that you know about?
Not that I know about. There is precedent for policy. I know even here at CITR, we're currently in the process of implementing a sexual violence policy. And so there is the idea of like institutional policy, but the idea of an autonomous body, not that I'm aware of. And so that's why I'm not skeptical, but I'm very curious to see if it actually happens, because so many of these times these kinds of communities kind of bring up these grandiose ideas and then don't take the time to do them, and things, or people forget, or people's interests fade. And right now there's a lot of passion towards this, and I really hope that that's continued. And I think all the people I talk to for this story also hope that's continued, and so something can actually happen.
So with all this mass outpouring of sexual assault and harassment allegations, throughout the world, but also here in Vancouver, and how do you think a community like Vancouver's DIY music scene can prevent this predatory behavior rather than just reacting to it?
It's harm reduction. That's what organizations like Good Night Out are so good for, and it's one of the reasons why Good Night Out's gotten so much good media attention in the last few months, especially for their Granville Street team's a good example of that. As the idea of educating people, and like there's only so much education you can do, of course, but I think that's one of the best ways is just ensuring that people are kind of aware of what's up and are aware of what is appropriate and what is not appropriate behavior.
Yeah, Melanie, clearly a lot of work went into writing this article, but was there something or some things that you had to leave out of reporting this story?
I left it. I would have loved to talk to even more people. But time is time, and I covered a lot of the voices I think were really important for this story. But I think that there is follow-up to be done still. Like, this was pitched as a follow-up story, and I'm happy with it being a follow-up story, but I think I would like to check back in 4 months and see what's happened, because I think things will change, or nothing will change. I'm very curious to see how that goes.
Well, thank you so much, Melanie. That was an important story, and thank you for sharing it with us.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you for having me on the News Collective. It's fun to be on the radio at a different time.
Thank you. That is Melanie. You're listening to Democracy Watch on CITR 101.9 FM. That was Melanie Woods, the journalist who read and discussed her most recent article on how Vancouver's music scene is dealing with October's sexual assault callouts. Now, after this break, we have an original report on the October 14th terrorist attacks in Somalia and the Somali-Canadian community's response to the media's coverage of that attack. I am Rahmatullah Sheikh. Stay tuned.
Hold of some pigskin. This is my shimmering life prize. All I must do is create a diversion. What could distract people who love sports? Sports. 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 Sports.
Do you find sports distracting? Feel the need to chant sports for hours on end? Then come on by the CITR station at the new sub to get involved. We do play-by-play, color commentary, audio production, interviews, and so much more. Only on CITR 101.9 FM.
The most powerful motivational speeches that I have ever heard came from people who told me I couldn't do something. You know why? Because when they told me I couldn't do it, I was bound and determined to show them that I could.
All Access Pass is back for Season 2. We are a collectively run weekly program that discusses equity, inclusion, and accessibility issues on and off UBC's campus, including both visible and invisible disabilities. You can catch All Access Pass every Thursdays from 2 to 3 p.m. Anyone can get involved. No experience is necessary. People of all abilities are welcome to join. Check us out on Facebook at All Access Pass or get involved by emailing accessibilitycollective@citr.ca.
You're listening to CITR 101.9, broadcasting from UBC's Point Grey campus, located on the traditional, unceded Coast Salish territory of the Hunkaminam-speaking Musqueam people.
Hydra CM نسيام نسيايا أنت سياخويا تليتين خماس كوي مستيو
And we're back. I'm Ryan Patrick Jones, and this is Democracy Watch on CITR 101.9 FM. So far, we've had a packed show with local headlines and journalist Melanie Woods. She joined us to share her reporting on the Vancouver music scene and last month's sexual assault callouts. We're now going to be turning to a different topic.
Yeah, Ryan. This is a piece that... Hey, thanks, Ryan. This is a piece that I, Rahmatullah Sheikh, reported on with my fellow News Collective member, Aidan Tong. We attended an event to address the Canadian and international media's coverage on the October 14th bombing in Mogadishu, which is the capital of Somalia. The event was put on by the Somali student community here at UBC on November 7th. Let's take a listen at this audio package. On the 14th of October this year, the Somali capital of Mogadishu suffered the deadliest terror attacks in the country's history. More than 300 people were killed and hundreds more seriously injured and missing when a truck loaded with explosives set off in a busy intersection of the city. The government has accused Al-Shabaab, an offshoot of the Al-Qaeda that has been at the forefront of an insurgency in the country for over a decade. While this has further challenged Somalia's new government to maintain stability in the war-battered African country, the tragic incident has also put the spotlight on the global media landscape and its coverage of the attacks. And not immune to the fears of security and alienation is the Somali diaspora in Vancouver. The World University Service of Canada collaborated with Global Lounge, Africa Awareness Initiative, and the Somali student community in the University of British Columbia for an event to raise awareness on the deadly attacks and raise funds through a silent auction. The event was titled Silent Attacks in Somalia: The Lives That Never Made the Headlines. Members of the News Collective team, I, Rahmatullah Sheikh, and Aidan Tong covered the event for Democracy Watch on CITR 101.9 FM. Amongst the speakers was Dr. Ali Abdi, a Somali-Canadian academic and the Professor of International Development Education and Head of the Department of Educational Studies at UBC. According to him, the roots of the existing turmoil trace back to the country's colonial past, and foreign interventions have done very little to help rebuild the country.
From 1960 to 1990, Somalia actually was arguably the most suffering victim of what we call superpower opportunism, where one time it was a satellite state for the Soviet Union, then it was a satellite state for the Americans, and through that circle, okay, the character of the country was damaged, I will claim tonight, beyond the national identity and the integrative economic political possibilities that were supposed to take place. But since 1990, I think one can say things are more or less straightforward. Different actors who are all fighting over something. Some of them can't actually explain what they are fighting for, but they are in the fight. So if there is a fight, well, if that's the only thing that's there, more or less, and it's just painful to see, then you are going to be a part of the fight. It becomes a matter of survivability, more or less. And there were the different interventions that have created all the problems that you see, external interventions from all kinds of groups, from international organizations that were managing resources in the name of Somalia without doing anything for the Somalis. Then those created the problems that you see here, where the Al-Shabaab group that are affiliated with Al-Qaeda and now partially affiliated with the, ISIS and so on and so forth, have become very powerful in the southern part of the country. The country is more or less fragmented. So even the response to something like this is very fragmented. And that itself creates a festering of these forces that are killing people and destroying the lives of people.
But beyond the country's history and the recent attacks, the one lurking question has again come to the fore. Does the global media value all lives equally?
The life of the Somali person and the suffering of the Somali person and the death of Somali person has become more or less normalized. It has become normal. So you see, 88 Somalis were killed tonight and you don't feel anything. 2 people were killed in the UK and the whole world is suffering.
We spoke to Dr. Abdi on the sidelines of the event.
The Prime Minister was recently interviewed after the attacks, and he said that where you live does really matter about how much of coverage you get. Do you agree with that statement, and what is your take on that?
Without a doubt. We have more or less a differentiated global citizenship system where we talk about the suffering of people who live what we call in the first world is always seen as more important than the suffering of the people who live in less developed parts of the world. So although that's not pronounced, but I think anyone who analyzes the news or sees, the values that are attached to these things can easily understand this categorization of citizenship and the value of citizenship, and that's so much determined by where you are from, where you live, where you were born.
Sorry, what else factors do you think can contribute to that as well?
Well, I think what contributes is more or less that we also may associate, death, destruction, civil war, suffering with some societies and some countries. And that itself can create problems, because irrespective of how much we associate problems with a specific location of the world, still the people who live there deserve peace, they deserve development, they deserve prosperity. So the problem actually is that we somehow generalize the context into the lives of people. But what we need to understand is that irrespective of the context, every human being is a full human being, and therefore they deserve to have peace, life, and security.
Also speaking at the event was Dr. Jenny Peterson, a professor in the Political Science Department at UBC with expertise in peace studies, international relations, and humanitarian studies. According to her, resolving conflicts like the one in Somalia requires interdisciplinary collaboration, and that UBC students can start by making a difference closer home in Vancouver.
I think sometimes people think, resolving conflicts, just leave that to the political scientists, the diplomats, the negotiators. But all of you, I bet you if I was challenge each of you to write something down, I reckon you all have a skill within you that will help contribute to peace in some way. And you should find that skill and find a small way to help it contribute to peace. And again, if all of those little acts built up over time, we could actually make a real difference. think about building peace locally, right? Sometimes we can't all go to Mogadishu. We can't help necessarily stop what's happening on the ground tonight in that country, but we can build peace here. And we can help people find their humanity, and we can create more of a kind of global sense that we need to recognize everyone's humanity by building peace locally. So there's so many options in Vancouver to do this. You can work with marginalized peoples on the downtown east side. You can engage with debates and concerns and discussions and projects around Aboriginal First Nations Indigenous groups in Canada. You can reach out to women's groups. There's so many different ways that you can try and build peace here that will help remind everyone else around us that humanity is important, that ethics is important, that everyone's lives matter, and those are things that you can do. And also, while you're doing those things and having such an impact locally, you're building up skills, you're building up knowledge that if you do want to go back to your home country someday, you have all this wealth of experience. Young people, you are the solution. Recast yourselves as the solution. Do not allow anybody to label you as the problem. And if you change your mindset and recognize that you yourselves are the solution, the world is going to change for the better.
We spoke to Professor Jenny Peterson, and she says that peace in Somalia will be a long journey, more like a work in progress than a finished project.
You spoke about peace being a verb and not a noun. So within the context of the recent attacks, could you shed some more light on that philosophy that you espouse?
So in the context of the events in Somalia, I think that a lot of people, and for obvious reasons, people want this conflict resolved. They want peace. They want that peace as a noun so that they can just get on with their lives and not worry about going into the streets, not worrying about sending their children out to play, not worry about, their basic safety. And it would be wonderful if there was a direct path to that peace, to that kind of tangible peace. But history has shown us that if we become complacent and we don't think about how we have to continually be inputting into a peace process, that conflicts will restart. So again, I didn't go into the statistics about how many conflicts actually restart within 5 years of a peace agreement. I don't know the statistic off the top of my head, but it's pretty grim reading. And the reasons we see that is because people kind of reify. They think that this peace agreement is this noun. The peace agreement will lead to this magical, this kind of almost utopian post-conflict setting. But peace takes work, and so I think what's going on in Somalia, it'll be those small steps towards peace. And once peace is built, they're going to have to continue working. This is going to be a long road. This is going to be decades and decades. So I talked about Germany. It took decades and decades for Germany to become a stable, prosperous country, and it's unfortunately, that's how post-conflict societies work, and it's going to be the same for Somalia.
At the lounge, discussions quickly turned to the media coverage of the Somali attacks, or as many argued, the lack of it. Some called out the motivations of media.
Powerful financial interests, powerful political interests. And as long as these coverages are in line with their ratings, that's what they will go for. At the end of the day, when peace is at odds with profit, profit wins.
While others talked about taking more responsibility to spread awareness.
Anyone to go on social media and say something. So it has to start within the country where the problem is, and then within the region where that country is.
Looking for student volunteers to record textbooks for those who cannot use print at the university. If you're a UBC student who is computer literate with an ability to read university material aloud and you have a willingness to learn new techniques, we ask for a 2-hour commitment once a week. For additional information and to set up an edition, call 604-822-6114 or email crane.volunteer@ubc.ca.
altijd blij dat we ons nu.
And here we are back with part 2 of Rematula's originally reported story on the Somalia attacks in October 14th and the media's coverage of them, as well as the local community's reaction to it.
At the lounge, discussions quickly turned to the media coverage of the Somalia attacks, or as many argued, the lack of it. Some called out the motivations of media.
Powerful financial interests, powerful political interests. And as long as these coverages are in line with their ratings, that's what they will go for. At the end of the day, when peace is at odds with profit, profit wins.
While others talked about taking more responsibility to spread awareness.
Anyone to go on social media and say something. So it has to start within the country where the problem is, and then within the region where that country is, and then within the continent, and then the world later. If the region, or let's say if Africa itself was all over in the media, even the media, the whole world will follow. So sometimes when we blame the media that the media is not covering other regions, me included, sometimes we need also to ask, what are we doing?
With diverse opinions surfacing at the event, we asked how the Canadian media fared in reporting the attacks.
Media plays a formidable role in our social lives, and media influence is pervasive in how we conceive the world around.
That's Faqih Khalif, a student from Simon Fraser University who used the discussion forum to voice his outlook on profits dictating media priorities. But despite his criticisms, he believes that the Canadian media's coverage of the attacks was relatively better.
I believe Canadian mainstream media had a better coverage. I won't say it sufficiently covered the attacks in Mogadishu, as horrible as it was. But in comparison, relative to how the American media has covered, there is a massive placard in the US. They hardly covered. It was basically covered on the sidelines. But I'm glad that the Canadian mainstream media has devoted enough attention. I wish it could have been more, but in comparison to other media outlets in the US and Europe, I think Canadian media did a great job.
Here's Dr. Ali Abdi.
I think it was mentioned, and because of the scale of the destruction, it was one of the first items of the news. But then within a day or 2 days, it fell off, more or less, the platform. So, in a sense, therefore, the magnitude of the problem and the destruction it has caused was not reflected in the continuation of the story in the news outlets.
I looked at my social media feeds for that day.
Professor Jenny Peterson.
Even though most of my friends are other professors, and also most of my friends are, politically engaged individuals, it wasn't a story that was appearing on my Twitter feed. It wasn't a story that was appearing on my Facebook page. And so I feel like that is indicative of a general trend within society where some conflicts just don't seem to matter, or if there's another event going on in the world, people pay attention to one event or another.
Against the backdrop of views and opinions, Hassan, a fourth-year student in UBC, had a message for the media.
A large number of people die, media doesn't talk about them, and then they are contented with it because all of them consider themselves dead. Technically, they consider themselves dead. I tell you this. This is from the bottom of my head. Every Somali in Somalia consider themselves dead because they don't know when they're gonna die, because nothing protects them, and when they die, nobody talks about them. It's like death with no remembrance. They die, no remembrance. So my message to the media is do justice in your line of service. Because it is important if you take responsibility to claim that you're doing something for the global community, it's good to do them fairly, no matter how large, no matter how many people have been affected. The only thing that I can tell them is actually just to be truthful and honest in their coverage. Because every life deserves a voice.
The Somali diaspora on campus told Democracy Watch about the people affected back home. Here's Hassan again, telling us about a friend who narrowly escaped the bombing.
The friend that I happened to speak with, actually he has been a classmate of mine and he's been a childhood friend. The first thing that he told me was he just lost it by the grace of God. He just missed the blast just by the grace of God, because he was there 30 minutes before the incident. He was right there right at the intersection.
But not all were lucky like Hassan's friend. Farahi Abdullahi, a first-year science student at UBC, shared with us some stories of individuals, families and dreams that succumbed to the attacks.
There's a student named Mariam Abdullahi Muhammad. She was only 24 years old. She completed School of Medicine at Benadil University and was preparing for her graduation when she got killed. Her father was traveling from Minnesota to participate in her graduation ceremony. At the airport, after he passed the checking point, he was told that his daughter was killed in the attack. He participated in her funeral rather than her graduation. She was dreaming that she will specialize in maternity and child health. So her dream was wasted. Another story is doctor called Muhammad Abdul Qadir Qarri. He was one of the active young physicians in Mogadishu. He took a great role in helping people who were affected by drought in 2016. Also, with his colleagues, he established the first voluntary blood donating organization in Mogadishu. And there's a lot of stories. There is a family who lost there's a mother who lost 4 of her children at one day.
What went through your mind when these attacks took place and when you came to know of the death toll that so many people were killed?
These people who died are like myself. They are, great number of them are like the age of, like our age. So you feel like if I were there. For example, my little brother was near the place that attacked because he passed and after minutes the attack happened. So you can feel it, it's something that could have happened to you or could have happened to someone who is in your family or something like that.
That was a UBC student putting names and stories behind numbers. Despite the sense of gloom that envelops this tragic incident, Hassan, another UBC student that you earlier heard from, said that the Somali diaspora in Vancouver must continue to raise awareness and aim to change the narrative.
Well, the role of the diaspora as we are, the best thing I can say for now is to raise a voice, such that these lives who are lost, uncovered, whose loss of life is not mentioned in the international arena, I think is something that's important that the diaspora like ourselves have raised. That is specifically why we decided to talk amongst ourselves as Somali students at UBC in a way that we can raise voice and way we can start discussion, because it's time to raise that voice so that we can change the narrative, because we have a government that has the public vote. It has the support of every Somali all over the world, including the diaspora. And we thought it's time to support, and we thought it's time to speak about this issue, because previously, the previous government, incidents like this happen, they don't even bring it internationally. But this time what happens is that when immediately the incident happened, the president came forward and said, it is this Al-Shabaab terrorist team that did this horrifically, and he declared 3 days mourning entirely all over the country. And that has been really good because it has captured the international media like ourselves. When we heard the president has called for 3 days mourning, it was like, wow, that's really amazing, because it made us that there was a time to feel for this, because previously it happens, nobody feels for them. It's just for themselves and for their families who are left with the pain. But as a diaspora, it's important that we reach out to the international community right now, international institutions like UBC, like other like the Canadian government and or international aid organizations and stuff like that, so that they can be there will be a voice that comes out to help out those people.
This report was compiled by me, Rahmatullah Sheikh, and Aidan Tong for Democracy Watch on CITR 101.9 FM.
So you're listening to Democracy Watch on CITR 101.9 FM. That was a story on the Canadian media's coverage of the October 14th bombings in Mogadishu, Somalia. It was reported by me, Rahmatullah Sheikh, and my fellow News Collective member, Aidan Tong. Right here at the studio, we are joined by Hamza Mahmood, a third-year student of kinesiology at UBC, and Saleh Ismail, a student in UBC's political science department. Thank you so much for joining us and for continuing this discussion.
Thank you for having us.
Exactly. Thank you.
Yeah. Can I first start by asking you, how did you learn of the attacks and what was your first reaction when you came to know about it?
For me, I learned about the attacks through social media. So I think I was just on my Twitter timeline, and I follow like a bunch of members of the Somali diaspora around the world, and they just started retweeting images. And then I was like, I thought like, why isn't this on the news? Why isn't anybody covering this? Like, this is huge. It was one of the largest terrorist attacks like in the world. And then I went to my mom, and she's like, yeah, it's on all the Somali websites. And I was like, this is crazy. Like, this is like one of the biggest attacks I've ever seen, and nobody's covering it. So that's how I found about it.
Yeah, you're nodding your head, Hamza. What about you?
Yeah, exactly. I didn't see it on social media. I actually got it from my mom, which actually got a call from my grandma, who's watching. She regularly watches like something called Hiran BBC and one of these audio podcasts and radio shows directly from Somalia. So once that happened, she called my mom and started talking about it, and I heard it from my mom. So, and I looked through on the internet, and I haven't seen any major news outlet talking about it. So I was like, oh, is this actually happening? What's going on? And I hear, again, prominent members in the Somali diaspora in London, in England, in America talking about it, even in Canada, messaging it about it and saying that, oh, it happened, but nobody's talking about it. So that's where the first thing kind of happened for me. So it was really interesting because usually I see all my news from always tells me, oh, did you see this on the news? I'm like, yeah, I already saw that, but this time I haven't seen it. I didn't know what was going on, and that information directly came from my mom. So that was quite interesting.
Yeah. What about the Canadian media? Did you see anything on the outlets that are run by Canada? What about Vancouver Sun, CBC? Anything that you saw in there?
The first time I saw it, I think a day or two after on CBC, on just the morning news, and then that was I was surprised because I thought it was pretty late. I thought they should have been covering it way earlier because I saw all these detailed reports about it on social media, on Twitter, and yeah, I saw it pretty late on the CBC.
Yeah, for me, I saw it on The Guardian. Guardian is a Canadian. No? Oh, well, that's the first one I saw it from The Guardian. I don't know why, but I think that was as well a day and a half bit after the actual event. So again, thought it was really awkward because I was like, I didn't see people posting it on Facebook. I didn't see, it doesn't have to be Somali, but somebody recognizing the attacks, which happens pretty much everywhere else in the world. So I was kind of interesting how people outweigh the different attacks and whatnot. So
yeah, clearly there's a growing resentment, right? That's also what we saw in the event. So what are some of your personal recommendations to the media when it comes to covering Somalia or the tragedies that take place there? Do you have anything in specific to mention?
I mean, personally, obviously, I wish they would cover tragedies that happen in developing countries more often. But I think take your cues from social media because whenever breaking news happens, I see it on my Twitter timeline first before anything else. So I think news media should take advantage of that because especially with their on the ground journalists there, you can just you can contact them, see what's happening because these are professional people who aren't being heard by Western media outlets and they're only reporting locally.
Yeah.
So that's one thing I'd suggest.
Another thing I like to add is I think it's impossible for media outlets to get every single tragedy, every single attack that's happening around the world. But when it comes to certain things of importance and necessarily of magnitude and scale, such as this event, I think it should be kind of brought forth into the headlines. Yes, we could be talking about a shooting that happened in the Okanagan last year or whatever in the headlines, but something so prominent happening in the world that people should know about, regardless of the ethnic group, regardless of the religion that the country is prominent in, regardless of who it is, it should be brought forth in understanding what's happening, why is it happening, what's going on. So my suggestion is media should have priority in events on such scales and should be technically brought forth the headlines as much as possible.
Yeah, last question. Maybe one of you can take this. So what about the event? Do you think that event was enough in raising awareness, and how would you rate its effectiveness?
I don't know about its effectiveness, but I know that I think it really showed me like the power of social media, because I think the Somali diaspora, it's huge, and like you could see like events like GoFundMe is launched around the world, and universities like Somali Students Associations and like from London, Scandinavia, Minnesota, Toronto, all these raising like a huge amount of money for Somalia. So, and it wasn't even just Somalis. Like I saw like members of other people who maybe not even like interact with Somalis, but still raising awareness. So I think that was amazing to see. So I think like social media does have the power to change the narrative around who is the most important when it comes to like who gets to be a victim in today's world.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Hamza and Saleh, for joining us in today's show. Really
Thank
appreciate
you for having us and continuing the dialogue.
Yeah,
it's really important. Thank you.
Thank you. And that's it for today. We hope you liked today's show. Join us again next Thursday at 5 p.m. for Democracy Watch on CITR 101.9 FM, bringing you alternative and uncovered current affairs coverage of Vancouver and Lower Mainland. Good night.